it's really easy to blame, like to point your finger externally. And there are probably more circumstances than not where you've been done to, or maybe you're approaching a culture of no when all of the urges in your spiritual, biological self are saying yes. Um, but ultimately, I think I try not to speak in terms of the most, but this is what I've found. To own the situation and call it your own and say, this is my problem. This is my challenge. Uh, I mean, the way I answer your question is it's my problem. Because then I'm empowering myself, but through taking ownership to say, how do I start? I feel connected to it. My strategy is to feel connected to everybody who is possibly going to be involved in the initiative that I'm going to undertake. I may not even know what it is yet, but there's this impulse that I feel strongly. I try not to stop myself. I try not to get in my own way. I try to own as much as I can. Try not to blame other people, but I do get upset. I do react. I do sometimes other. So it's not like I'm coming from being perfect about it. But yeah, just taking the whole context and setting in your own lap. Because then you're like, all right, what am I going to do about it? I mean, one reason why this is so important is because we're so acculturated to asking permission for things that are our birthright to do. I just want to lay one thing on the table, which is the tipping, sort of the leverage point. It's where we approach the lid on top of the container of like all these juicy problems and tragic, oppressive issues. And then on the flip side of all of these sparkling, shining opportunities that are, like one is a consequence of really ill-considered or even nefarious design. And on the flip side of all of those is the opportunity that somehow was missed because we weren't designing collaboratively or something like that. So I try to own it. Only not ever to make it about myself, but to always be inviting and always be in partnership with people. To me, to be part of a relational network, to actually live in that. Like I get to live in Portland where the relational network is really everywhere. I'm working in lots of different capacities, and every now and then I just got to go out, sneak out in the middle of the night, and just do something by myself. Like do a cookie blast all over the neighborhood. Nobody knows who did it. I get to go home and know that only I did it, and I'm not telling. Like just putting cookies on people's porches with notes saying, I bet you're awesome. They're like, who did this cookie? Maybe they'll eat it. But I got to work in a lot of different modalities. Sometimes it's like lots of sitting around a table, as we oftentimes do. Activists. One of those kind of causes where you just don't even know when the table sitting is going to end, and you're finally going to plant something. You don't even know what the whole group doesn't even know it. Anyway, I'm talking about a project right now. It's irritating. So there's a lot of those, but then there's a lot of small-scale collaborations. Personally, I like to work in like groups where people can sense about a common vision, and then they just like say, you go, you small group, you subgroup, you subculture, just run. Shower us with gifts. Don't tell us how you're going to do it. Don't seek our consent, our consensus. We've consensed on the overall idea. We don't want to micromanage each other and make it not fun anymore. So lots of flexibility. And I think one of the things that will characterize, this is just kind of like looking ahead into the future, but I think one of the things that's going to characterize our sustainable creative culture, however we'll define it, will be that we are gifting each other constantly. And we're actually able to hear each other and thank each other and actually say you're welcome and really receive that gift. But being able to take initiatives, like to arrive in a culture of trust, where we do trust each other, and then we know that out of that is going to come all this love and stuff is going to happen. You know, I was taught to be a control freak in architecture school. Both of my architecture parents were taught to be control freaks, to be elitists, and we've all been working really hard on losing that. But it's been a personal journey of transformation to get to the point where my favorite thing is not to imagine and draw and then create something that I can already foresee. It's to work in partnership with people and help them find their groove or their creative capacity. Why? This isn't about selflessness, you know. For an American, it unfortunately comes as a revelation that we're part of a larger self. You know, we're so taught. I mean, we're individuated from the start, graded separately, almost like meat. You know, sort of sent from one holding tank to the next, raised like on a fish farm or something. You know, sort of released, but always sort of going in these phases of kind of a monocultural experience, and then even told, like, when you're dead, St. Peter will look you up in the phone book or whatever he's got, you know, and he'll find your separate ass name and judge you as if, you know, you weren't within the cradle of a condition that made you who you are, you know, and you weren't part of a culture of arrested adolescence that was making you crazy the whole time. Like, no. So, yeah, seeking, like, being part, I mean, this is permaculture, only applied to ourselves. You know, to take the notion, like the subtext or the subtitle of permaculture is planet repair. So take that and say, oh, well, we're part of the planet, part of the ecology. These principles must apply to us as well. And seek mutuality. I mean, every time we save our money to fly across the ocean, we want to go see evidence of mutualism. We want to go see the places where people actually realize that they're part of a larger whole. We want to go there and see, like, the village heart. We're desperate for it. There's this absence in our lives. Part of that individuation that's reinforced, of course, is that the United States, St. Louis included, does have the lowest number of community gathering places of all so-called first world nations. As Noam Chomsky keeps trying to help us understand, our country has kind of enacted its settlement patterns in a very, very different way than ever happened before. As he says, it's the first time in the history of the world that, like, a colony of an empire itself aspired to be an empire. So it was already living within dictated hierarchies and structures, and then it formulated an expansion plan based on Roman colonialism, which is why San Luis is a grid, Los Angeles is a grid, you know, Santa Cruz is a grid, Portland's a grid, St. Louis is a grid, Chicago's a grid. Like, it all comes back to a moment in 1785. Actually, this is a big deal to know. Why do we have the lowest number of outdoor gathering places of all first world nations? It goes back to the first of the four great documents that kind of underpin our reality. Everybody knows, of course, about the Declaration and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But the first one that we're never taught about is the National Land Ordinance of 1785. That blueprinted Roman colonialism and cast it over the entire continent, intending that all native cultures would be subsumed and their lands taken. Written into the plan. The National Land Ordinance, you can also find it as the Northwest Land Ordinance. Started off as the Northwest Land Ordinance when Ohio was as far northwest as anyone had gone. And it was reauthorized with each wave of expansionism. But it proscribed the political economic structure, and it you can just boil it down by saying it said that the lands of native people would become a commodity, and everything would become basically saleable as a commodity, where time and space and life would be part of an interchangeable economic construct. It mandated that, and now it's normative. We live within it. It seems to infuse our values and our ways of seeing. But I think maybe the most evident leverage point is that when you walk outside of your door, you can't see a community gathering place anywhere within most American neighborhoods. And I'm not talking about parks. I'm talking about the village hearts that we fly over the oceans to go see elsewhere, like the Italian Piazza, which is an intersection. And of course, it's because it's where people's pathways come together so their lives converge, you know. And if it's an important spot where people need to sell tomatoes and they need to like have some kind of discussion or maybe fight with each other or whatever, and other people have to get through, it gets a little bigger. Maybe eventually it gets really big like some of them, and sometimes they're just incidental and small, but big enough to recognize or to reflect the fact that people bump into each other there. You know, where we live, you run into other people in a car there, and that actually is evidence of the power of the crossroads, you know, that somehow you will converge one way or another. And when the community is deciding how the settlement patterns proceed, they decide that that will be a place where their lives come together. But when you live within an empire where our settlement patterns are proscribed, and we're told that where we live we have no power, like our neighborhoods, you know, and that you have to basically ask permission all the time to do things, you will find that that space is nullified. That's a militaristic gig that goes all the way back to the beginning of the grid. When you conquer people, you erase their settlement patterns, you impose the colonial grid, whether it was Assyria or Babylonia or Egypt or Greece or Rome, and then the Spanish and English brought it to the Western Hemisphere and imposed it over everyone here. But this is a big deal to understand, especially as permaculture designers, because we want to design relational networks. We want people to be able to benefit from each other's actions. Like, you know, we want to somehow have more come out of the ways that we design than we can even imagine. So we must recognize that we're in a colonial structure. And we have to be aware of it. We have to stare it in the face. Like, we have to own it. I'm lucky because I have had I've had Native people explain it to me. There was something that happened, and I was sort of mentioning it earlier tonight, and I'll sort of mention it now because it's part of the context of where I'm coming from and why this is so important to talk about, I feel. There was a day in 1987, I think it was, 88 actually, when I woke up and went to work, architecture and planning firm. And towards the end of the day, in this huge meeting where we were working on a huge building on the edge of the Willamette River in downtown Portland, it would become the Bank of America building. There was this discussion that happened in the middle of the meeting, and there was about 12.5 people in the firm there. And the government inspectors had just left. They were talking about the need to basically dig almost to China to dig out all this sulfuric acid that this trucking company had been dumping on the site. And when they left the meeting, the big contractor, the biggest in Oregon, Hoffman Construction, the vice president just started to laugh about how they had been routinely covering up toxic waste concentrations and paying off government inspectors while they didn't want to interrupt their timeline. They didn't want to slow things down and cost more money. And everyone in the meeting kind of laughed. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, I didn't know very much at the time about toxic waste. And even the word sustainable, I didn't really have currency yet. But I remember quitting that day, and it was the most spectacular job of quitting. I totally recommend it to you all. You get to do it one time per job, actually. Yeah.
Can't practice.
We're talked to in these ways that we can also use when it's time. So I went around, I just sat there like blown away at my desk. I was looking at my white hands and my white shirt and my tie, and I was like, my God, like they just think I'm part of this, thoughtless, conscienceless organism or something. Not even an organism, organization. And I decided I would quit. And I went to the desk of each of my 5 bosses, and I said, "Can I see you in the conference room right now?" And that's how they talk to you. But when you talk like that, they're like, "Oh, okay," because it's reflexive. So I got them all in the conference room, and they're sitting down like, "What's this about?" I mean, they didn't. I don't think that they had even realized like our employee is about to do something. They're just like, you're just used to being talked that way, to you, by your dad maybe or something. So I was playing dad for a second. But I quit for like 3 hours. I just quit at them. I pulled up everything that I thought that designers were supposed to aspire to do in this world. I mean, coming from my parents, if there's one bit of modernism that is actually valid, it's this notion that design can transform the world. It can uplift, it's very humanocentric, but uplift the human family. That there is this sense of community, this commonality, like, we are a people, resonates. I mean, that's the stuff that really turns students on when professors talk that way, for sure. It's what they're starving for. So, yeah, I talked about all these things that are our responsibility as designers to do, something about a better world, and how we had betrayed it over and over again, not just that day, but all these other times in that office. I was drawing pictures. Like, I don't know, I was criticizing our project. Anyway, I so freaking quit. But I did it, like, respectfully and with love. Like, I was like, I love you guys. Thank you so much for treating me the way you have and making a place for me here, but I so freaking quit because of this and this and this. So I really encourage you to do that when you can. So I went traveling for like 7 years, and I didn't have a lot of money saved up at all. But I just was like, must get out of here and see what people are like. So I was like, we are not being people. Like, this isn't even people here. This isn't even an option, So I found myself for 7 years going around to different indigenous communities and just being like, do you have any idea what's wrong with me? Like, do you have any idea what's wrong with my people? What is wrong with us? And they're like, seriously? Really? Okay. And then they're like, clear the table, bring in all this food and drink, and just talk for hours and hours.
Wow, cool.
Yeah. Imagine doing that.
Yeah.
Really wanting to hear what other people have to say, especially people that have been seriously done to. So, yeah, they talked about colonialism. This one guy, though, put it in a way that meant the most to me. I was crying, and I was apologizing on behalf of us. I was like, I'm so sorry for what has happened. And this guy, tears were coming down my cheeks, and he comes over and he holds my face in his hands. He looks me right in the eyes, and he says, you guys cannot take this upon yourselves. I was like, what are you talking about? I'm European. What can you mean? And he's like, no. What was done to us was not so long ago, so that at least we know who we are. But you, for your people that happened so long ago, you don't even know who you are. I was like, what are you talking about? He said, I can't tell you. I can't tell you when and how your villages were destroyed. But there is a time. There's a time, and you need to look at your own story, your own family story. Try to learn. Like he said, when you get home, go out into the street near where you live, and stand in the middle of the intersection, and look and notice that all the lines are long and flat and straight. And then walk a little ways to the next one, and notice that all the lines are long and flat and straight. Then go to another town, another city, and notice the same thing, and then realize that you're in something gigantic that was imposed through tremendous violence, that has swept up the story of your own people and washed you across the planet, and you don't even know what happened to you. So, part of the story, of course, for a lot of people in this circle, is something having to do with Romans attacking your place. Celts being attacked by Romans. And I don't want to pretend that anybody's perfect, but at this point I think I get a lot of power, energy, out of realizing that I am both the conquered and the conqueror. The reconciliation has to really, really begin inside, at zone zero most, within oneself. So as I was traveling around asking questions about what was up with us, it really helped me to hear and be able to look more honestly at myself, and really to begin to own the situation as much as I could. I came back to Portland and I saw things about it. didn't like even more than ever, but I loved it more than ever, and I owned it more than ever, you know. And it took a little while to quite get up to speed on it, but it's a really basic thing. I think we try to get it through meditation and endless retreats, therapy sessions, to try to at last say, I am, you know, San Luis Obispo. I am. Like I can tell you, I am Portland. I am. I am that place. And it is me. And the way I treat other people who live there and who love it is that they are Portland too. And I hope that they feel that way. Even if they don't use those words, I hope they have a sense of ownership and connection to a place that is so powerful that they will not submit anymore to absurdities and injustices, so many more things that we think we're helpless to confront. So, yeah, I was given good advice, and all of it leads to mutualism. You know, all like I have been to places where you're like, God, these people are strong. Boy, these children are their eyes are so bright. I'm thinking particularly of this group called the Lakeman Maya in southern Mexico in Chiapas. A lot of stories I could tell from there, but children that are fully engaged, you know, just totally different kinds of patterns. Like we get sent off. Our families are divided by design, you know, to go off and be taught by people you don't even know. Maybe they don't even think of themselves as mentors. Parents go off to do things that are repetitious and maybe don't benefit them. And at the end of the day, nobody's really expanding their social networks, and that's just absolutely wrong. Nobody ever volunteered for that. So, yeah, after seeing all of these places where intergenerational communities really have power where they live, I did end up coming back to my neighborhood and stood in the street intersection that I'd grown up next to most of my life, and stood there looking. And I'd learned about all this stuff in architecture school. They teach you about it, and they teach us about it in high school. They call it the Jeffersonian grid, but it isn't. Thomas Jefferson didn't invent this thing. He just copied what the Spanish had already been doing for hundreds of years, you know, to erase what was there, erase alternative cultures, because we are more attracted to anything but how we're living. And empire knows that, so they erase what has pre-existed. Yeah, but I mean, I don't want to just talk about what's wrong, because the whole point of going on a search like that is to come back with something, and you have to come back with a changed self. You can't just come back with an idea. Joseph Campbell talks about going off on a journey and coming back with a boon or something, and this is like an archetypal thing. Everyone has their own experience of it in some way, and some folks like me have to leave where I live because I'm not very smart. So others can stay home and see it playing out all around them. Like, your standard grandmother will have already figured all of this out without all the drama of travel. If you're already wired for service, you'll tend to notice these things if you have a lot of empathy and you get some help. So I had to go a ways, kind of get beat over the head in a little sort of way. But anyway, that's where my activism really began. I finally had a sense of the context, and you might say, well, Mark, you're a designer. Maybe that helps you. I think everyone is a designer, and they should be supported to be a creative problem solver using design in their lives to meet their own needs and their own challenges and to help each other. And the idea that basically, I mean, we talk about privatizing, air and water and genetics and seeds. Yeah, well, it goes into us as well. Professions, I mean, the definition of the city-state, which is the administrative unit of colonialism, is that people are stratified, compartmentalized, and specialized. It's just a function of westward expansion. So, yeah. I mean, part of what you do is you come back transformed, but also hopefully you come back as a generalist. Like you're so much more curious and open and interested in the things that are happening in our world. And part of that ownership is to own the whole thing, not just the piece that you feel like you're a specialist in. I mean, everybody's a community builder. Everybody has ideas about food. Everybody can relate to energy, energy efficiency, spiritual energy. This Lakeman Maya culture, everybody was their own priest. There was no church. There was no priesthood over them. There was a time when a church tried to come into their village and say, "We want to build a church. Where would you like it?" They didn't really ask if it was okay to do it. And the Lakeman said, "Well, how about up on that hill over there? That's great. Right over there, over the town." So the guy thought, "Well, they're really receptive. This is great." So he built his church, and then the entire village moved across the lake. And they're like, "Everybody's free. Everybody's free. You can build your church. We can move the village." So that's what they did. But everybody needs to also be their own leader. They have to use their own discretion. So the reason I love placemaking is because it's integrative. I'm interested in everything. I'm interested in environmental issues as well as I am social issues and economic ones. I want to see alternative currencies. I want to work with children. Placemaking does all of that. It's not like you even have to figure out how the pieces all fit. We're living in a society where things are disintegrated. Notice, of course, how at parties we talk about what we do for a living, and then that's kind of like that's our story. As if somebody needs to understand you as a specialist. My parents are that way. They're still like, "What are you doing? What's permaculture again?" And yeah, because they're used to just talking in terms of job descriptions, really, and that's acculturation. So, yeah, to come back a generalist, to come back really curious, and also that sense of ownership, not just of the challenge, but also of the history of violence as well. I mean, it's really important for me as a man of European descent with white skin to be able to do that. I must take responsibility. I swear, if we don't do that, we do not grow. There's a part of us that just atrophies if we're in denial. But I'm not talking about being guilty. I'm talking about joining in a common cause. When that Mayan guy held my face in his hands, and he's like, "No, we are part of one huge story that has impacted everyone. Everyone is their own story. Every culture is their own story in the larger story, but we're part of something gigantic that's affecting us all. And everybody is endangered. So, yeah, having a sense of connection to that and ownership of it is a really, really powerful place to be coming from. Creative ideas flow more readily. You become, I'm speaking just from experience, more receptive, more interested in other people. Like when I learned that I used to come from a mutual culture and somebody smashed that and forced me to think I was alone, I looked around at my mom and I'm like, well, that was done to her as well. No freaking way anymore kind of feeling. That was done to my sister and my brother. Like this kind of individuation and isolation is contributing so mightily to our personal, individual experiences of trauma and violence in our society that it's time to take it so freaking personally that we stop waiting around. Because when you realize that all this othering that's happening, where you walk into a situation and you can't even speak because you're afraid of what people think of you, like that is not the way we are wired. I hope that you've gone to an indigenous culture and watched them, maybe they've been in a multi-day shaman initiation ceremony or something, and they've been all dancing together for days, and at the end of that, they all stand up and speak from their deepest inner self, and they're so proud to tell their community how much they love them. That's who we are. To get practice in that from the time you're a child to the time that you pass on, and then nobody forgets you because, like everybody wants to keep celebrating each other's story. We are so rife with paradox. I want to feel pissed about it and then highly motivated to deal with it. That's how I am. I look at how freaking pissed I am at something, and I look at the flip side, and it's like I see a better world. I see this opportunity, So, but in order to get there, get back to multiple modalities. Sometimes you see something and feel something, And you just have to undertake it, or you just have to begin and other people jump in with you because they can see that you're trying to do something tremendous. They want to help you. And sometimes you swing over and you want to help them too. That mutuality goes in all directions. All right, well, I should tell you more about City Repair. And let's see. You know, what we've done is a bunch of transferable strategies that are all great ways. Like you were asking how to get started, how to begin. And so it's basically a collection of stories so far of ways that people start transformation that is self-replicating where they live. And it's, you can call it urban permaculture, you can call it placemaking. And also, if people do this kind of thing, it doesn't have to be called anything in particular. You can call it whatever you want to call it, because after all, the most transferable principle of it is that it's coming from the place-based community itself, whatever you're undertaking. Now, at the same time, it's true that we're all facing very similar challenges, relatively similar challenges around, political disempowerment and just this broad range of issues that is just really endemic to the nature of our urban places. But permaculture helps massively. Urban permaculture helps, and urban permaculture, incidentally, is a very, very different thing than conventional permaculture. And by conventional, I mean not happening in the Australian outback, where you have lots and lots of room and where your notion of zones just kind of goes out to the extent of some land holding. Urban permaculture is where everything you talk about in permaculture has a social implication, and there are more principles in urban permaculture because of that. So, like for instance, you think, ordinarily you think as things as radiating out from where you are, but in an urban setting, it's suddenly overlapping with concerns that are radiating out from everyone else. So there's this great overlap that is actually very, very wonderful and juicy that can bring you together. Well, okay, so City Repair, in our case, in Portland, began by something like standing in a street intersection. That was my part. But I think everybody else in the neighborhood that was about to come together had already had their own experience of living in this place where people didn't talk. So coming out of not talking and getting creative in public space, everybody's kind of ready to do that. This is why, the car has existed for about 100 years. And before then, the spaces between our homes were really much perceived to have much more as a commons. Our relationship to the spaces between our homes was really, that space was really much more of a way of bringing ourselves together rather than making us feel as if we're divided from each other, and this sort of space becomes a conduit or a throughway. Even when cars aren't there, you're like, oh, that's just for cars. So we began by seeing differently. I mean, I talked about the colonial grid, but it's also talking about revillaging. It's way more powerful, not even to see the grid, but to see the fractured pieces of the village, and to see all the villagers walking around. If you can get to the point where you're this villager and you're like, oh my God, everybody's on the same side and they don't even know it. They all want to live in a safer, better world. They all want to have a creative, fulfilling, aesthetic experience of being alive. Just to know that. When you sit down with a bureaucrat and they're all mad at you, you can't do that to public space, you can't take over the streets like that, what are you thinking?
They're public.
And you're, they did say that's public space and so nobody can use it. Which was absurd. I mean, to a villager, that's just crazy talk. You're like, you're kidding, right? You're like, no, we're not kidding. We're in charge of everything. And you're like, well, but you're transportation officials. Don't you realize this is a common space? It's just for cars. Don't talk to us about this sociology stuff. We never learned this stuff. And we're like, really? You're in charge of 22,000 miles of common space in the city, and you have no training whatsoever in anthropology? And you think it's just for cars? That is a really bad joke on us all. Yeah. So, so to see that intersection as it's to see its potential. My friend, this anthropologist named Pedro Ferbel, he tells people to begin by walking into a street intersection and whispering kind of low and saying something like, "El Egua, I know you're here." And then just blowing it a kiss, and it's like, "Oh, you see me, rah!" And it's weird stuff starts to happen the next day. Weird stuff, like people interacting, people, just things going on there that you might not have noticed before. So that's how I advise people to begin. Like, see the potential that the village heart is just aching to be there, or maybe it's already under there. Maybe it was like broken and smashed underneath what is now a street intersection, and just calling it to come forward, through our actions or something. So for city repair, it was too much at once to take the intersection. So we decided, me and some housemates and some friends, decided to create a piece of the village as if we already lived in the village. And of course, you want to choose the most strategic piece of the village program. It would be a commons. It would be a social commons. So there are meeting houses, there are places where people process grain and store it. There are places where families get together inside and outside. There are places where whole community scale people get together inside and outside. So what piece are you going to choose? How much resources, how many people do you have to help? What is the context you're going to work in? In our case, it was a garden. It was a neglected, overgrown garden. So we said, all right, we're going to create the most spectacular meeting house this city has never seen before. And we were advised by native folk that this would be a leverage point and to not get a permit. Because for one thing, we couldn't. Public assembly, that can't occur within the housing zone. No. We're the planners of your reality. You have to have your community gathering not where you live. And planners aren't trained to understand the sociological implications of our disengagement and absence of place, but you can feel it. So we said, all right, we're going to build the most crazy, wonderful meeting house. And for me personally, it was really important to refute a few of the really awful dogmas of modernism, like that nature and humanity are separate. They're separate, Louis Kahn said, so you have to somehow design your architecture to make humanity distinct. And at the same time, on the other hand, nature is the source of all metaphors. So how in the world can you say that? Okay, so we built this fabulous meeting house, and it was designed to be, talk about sacred geometry, it was really the shape of a womb. 1,000 square foot womb. And it was woven into this living garden with these fruit trees and a great conifer and a nut tree. And it was saying, no, nature and humanity are integral, and we're going to create a space that says that so strongly that we won't even need to talk about it, and people will be blown away when they go in there. So, but it was more than that. There was layers and layers of metaphor and function that were woven into it. It was all made of natural and recycled materials. First of all, the perimeter created the shape, kind of kidney bean shape, of a womb space. But the perimeter was all doors and windows set on posts so that they would all open. So at a certain point, if we were successful, way more people would want to get into the tea house than could get in. So then we would just open the entire perimeter, and everyone inside and outside would feel connected. So we waited until the tea house was full, the entire yard was full, people were all around the adjacent intersection, all having dessert and tea. Like hundreds and hundreds of people were there, wanting to get into the tea house, but just kind of settling for somebody's lawn instead, because the effect was radiating out. And the police would get called every now and then. And this was before the building bureau was even called. A lot had been happening. A lot of people were getting connected. And really, it was simple. It was like, oh my God, we're villagers. All forms of community meeting houses where people can just share stories and get together are not here. And it's like saying to a snail, you don't have a shell, or like to a bird, oh, you just live in a box in the grid, and then suddenly they realize that there's this thing called a nest and that they can even fly. That's sort of what we were working on.
You just did it with your neighbors. He was asking how you did it. Was this your corner?
Oh, you asked?
With your neighbors, right?
We had access to there was no advertising at all. We were like, if we're right, and this is archetypal, that everybody needs a community meeting space where you don't have to believe something to be able to feel like you belong, and you can just go there. And
There had to be some way that message got out there so people heard that. I mean, obviously people would gravitate towards that, but was it just all word of mouth?
yeah, that was the intention. Help people to talk to each other. Like, give them something so compelling that they want to tell other people about, that the effect would just grow. So I think that the total cost of this was about $65 because we were just pulling stuff out of dumpsters. A bunch of trees had blown down that year in a storm. So yeah, it was this really gorgeous. It was like walking into a forest almost. Like in Selwood in southeast Portland. On the corner of an intersection, there was a 100 by 100 lot. Half of the lot was an open garden with some couple conifers and some cherry trees and pears and nut tree. And some other like a rhododendron stuff. So there was a lot of vegetation there. We just wove it into that, and then we built all these platforms in and among the trees. It wasn't quite abandoned. My dad actually owned it. That's why I had access to it. And I didn't tell him I was going to do it. And he didn't understand at all for a long time. But yeah, there's so much to say about that little piece. But what that did was bring a lot of people together and challenge assumptions and behaviors, like to challenge the idea that we would have to get permission for such a thing. Part of why that made sense to me was when I was visiting these different native cultures, they would get up in the morning and say, like in one case, somebody observed that there wasn't at least 3 places for an elder woman to sit on her way to get bread from her house. And they're like, this is crazy, you know. So they said, kids, come on, let's go. And then they mentored these kids, and in a very short time, there were definitely 3 benches for her. That's their building code, you know. Make sure there's at least 3 benches. And then in another case, we built a latrine in the Lakeman village. And it's very, you know, just kind of like kids getting together to build a tree house. But just show up on the site. And I was like, hey, wait, aren't we going to draw it first? And they're like, just chop that tree over there. And like, by the time I'm done chopping, we're almost halfway done. It's like, no need for a permit. No need to go off and go work to make money to pay for somebody else to tell you what to do. So anyway, the tea house created this enormous capacity in the neighborhood of people knowing each other and interacting with each other as people used to do only a few decades ago. And at that point, people on all the corners were excited. And this elder Catholic woman on the southwest corner wanted what she called a 24-hour solar-powered self-service tea station. And on the other corner, somebody wanted to put in this beautiful sculpture of the Tree of Life and a little chalk dispenser and an art and poetry kiosk. And on the third corner, just a whole bunch of interactive stations where people could put out information and write poetry on a big board and a little sort of free marketplace. And on the fourth corner, we wanted to put in a library. And supposedly this is the first little free library in the world, or I've seen a few articles to that effect. And it's kind of worth talking about because it almost didn't happen. And on that fourth corner, there was a guy, a dragster mechanic, who was just like, you know, you're all crazy. It's fine for you to do on those other corners, but not on my corner. Like, I went over to talk with him, and I was like, Brian, would you be interested in having a little library on your corner? And he said, no way. So on this, I don't know, some of you might think of this story poorly, but I went back over to the house where I lived on the northwest corner, and my friend Emily, who's a very beautiful woman, used to walking around in her bikini in the yard, asked me how it went, and I said, well, he said no. And she said, we'll see about that. She just walked right over there, and 5 minutes later came back and she said, put it in. And that is what happened. That's that, and you know, it was built by these wonderful foster kids who, you know, I still hear from, and that changed their life. So suddenly we had all 4 corners animating and defining the intersection, even before we painted it. And all of that was illegal, and the city didn't know about it yet, but we all felt powerful. This is part of the effect, I think, that's vital to engender our sense of ownership of place and our activation. So I want to skip a little bit forward, because where we started is so different from where we are now with the city and the bureaus and the leadership. like we dreamed of and intended and talked about systemic transformation, where we are now is just crazy wonderful. Like, just last week, an ordinance was being created, and it's about to go before the city council, that lets every single block, like it's already possible to put anything you want in public space for free. Composting facilities are free. There's pre-approved solar-powered cob kiosks for free. All these interactive stations and features and libraries and stuff are just kind of happening all over the city. And the city has said, you know, register for a free permit so that we can give you insurance, you know, so we can cover you. And that's super awesomely progressive. But now the city is saying, how interesting that vandalism never happens at these places. You know, how interesting that all these things seem to be going so well. And it's the main thing that people really want to talk about in the city, is this kind of empowerment. So the new ordinance lets people put at least one little free library on every block face all across the city for free, and without even getting a permit, without even letting the city know that you're doing it. And it doesn't have to be a library. In fact, it can be anything that you want virtually. The thing that brought us to this tipping point, which I think is absolutely transformative, like for communities to be able to say, we will do what we want right now and we don't need to tell the city, is a massive step forward in terms of a legal restructuring. You know, that'll lead to more things. But yeah, it's a partnership culture that's emerging. But the tipping point was created by this little roomie station that somebody proposed last year. Imagine a free self-service roomie poetry dispenser in public space. There is no chance that this, like, I didn't know really much about the couple. They moved in a couple houses away from the first intersection project that I am still connected to after all these years. And I didn't know very much about them, but the couple's very, very powerful, very confident, very connected in terms of power around the country. In fact, the husband, Firuz is his name, is in charge of our deep space probe program with NASA. So they were interested in putting in a roomie station. He's Iranian, made sense. So I told him, no brainer, transportation has made this easy. Well, there was a guy in transportation who for some reason came out of the woodwork and said, I'm not letting this happen anymore. This is ridiculous. Islamic poetry in the streets? Where is this going next? I'm shutting this whole thing down. And he declared, you know, I am a conservative and I have, to say that in Portland, Oregon, they just took him in a closet and made soup out of him. The county, the board of the county is all super powerful women. And they got together with the mayor and the city council, and they're like, okay, this is a teachable moment, and this is a moment where we need to no longer be susceptible to this kind of crap. So now they're just making it so that transportation is going to barely have anything to say with the advancing of these projects. So I'm kind of going on about this because, you know, you start somewhere and you just keep focused. Talk about guilds, like, in a guild, somebody finally decides to commit. You know, somebody finally is like, this soil is compacted, and we gotta just drill down into this sucker. And even though I won't be here long, you know, because other things are gonna come, I'll have broken up the soil for other things to come. And then those other things come, and you don't know what it's gonna be. But like, somebody must start. And we have no idea where this is all going. Like, we don't even know what we're doing. But we had an instinct and a sense of direction and a way to start.
Thinking up about your interaction with the fish. There's, when you're looking at streets and drainage, you might perceive some areas where the drainage for the streets might be extra bad. And how do you divert that and then make it creative on the side so you can work with the city somehow? They can work on the street to grid to what do you call it? Put obstructions like long ridges
Yeah.
perpendicular to the street.
Yeah.
And then you guys, we could make a creative way to have a sluice so that it could not all go into the ocean.
Yeah. Well, these kinds of projects have to be designed specifically everywhere they go. But they're all creative community building opportunities. It's important to see that you not only have a water problem, you also have an opportunity to help the community learn together about the issues and then to design a solution together and to help grow leadership in our children at the same time. Because of course in permaculture we want to try to get all these benefits to come out of any sort of
Right, a
problem.
lot of the intersections in Portland might have not the curbs with the drainage suit, but the cutouts and the bioswales right there
Yeah.
on the corners.
The first time that happened in the city where we put in a curb cut and then we relocated sidewalks to go more into the middle of the space where we were creating kind of an urban park. We shifted the sidewalks over in order to create swales. And this had never happened before. It was, not in Portland anyway, it was the idea of a 13-year-old young woman who said, well, rather than just sending this into the stream, couldn't we just deal with it locally? So we created all these ways for water to spill into the site around its perimeter. And, we designed it so that we would get as many people out together to be doing the work and installing it and making the public art that would go onto the site that would be part of the whole demonstration project. So we tried to fold as many benefits in as we could into that intervention.
So, make the roads a little pumped in certain places.
Well, the road's already kind of doing that usually by design, so it's spilling water to its edges. And then you can try to figure out how to capture that as it's going to a drain.
They do have in the city right now of San Luis and SLO Grande and Napomo, they give you $1,000 per household to capture your stormwater and do something better with it. And so you just apply, and they hear your case, and then if it's worthy, you get your money. But it'd be really great to see it more collective, to those intersections or ways that they can be combined together. And it's a good way to get plants in your life involved that way to clean your water.
Yeah. So one key thing I was just thinking is it's easy to get caught up in the technicality of permaculture and the techniques, but really I think the underlying, one of the deep messages you're saying is get your neighbors together so that you can design the solution for your community, right? And then get your kids involved and have that neighborhood kind of initiate the children and be part of these solutions because they're so powerful. I mean, my son designed a little village where he made everybody cob houses, and in between them he made them go outside so that they would hear the birds and do things. But really we got to get the families and the people together talking. And that was one small, we'd sort of sent out in the email that there would be some discussion about in terms of the succession and sort of the challenges of 50% of the population being a little transient. So how do you create that community where maybe half your neighbors might be not necessarily looking at it long term? And there's a lot of opportunity there because there's so much, knowledge and just energy and eagerness, but somehow we have to sort of enclose those folks into community so that we just get this design to work, or else if people keep leaving, then it gets really hard to have a long-term succession plan. Do you have any thoughts on that challenge?
Yeah, it really was the focus, that how you just encapsulated it was our key strategy from the start. We knew that we had a lot of work to do, a lot of reintegrating of working and playing to do, but that we had to do a lot of, I'm thinking of succession and how we talk about succession in the design of plant communities. But the principle of succession really works with ourselves as well. There needs to be a starting point. There's things that need to happen to set up the conditions for even more amazing stuff to happen. But the thread that weaves through everything, it seems, about our cultural recovery is the culture. What helps us to go beyond needing to vote about everything all the time? How do we cultivate the will inside of ourselves to choose make choices voluntarily that support a better world. And that was what we were focused on from the beginning. How to catalyze this kind of behavior all over the city, where people were choosing to be more creative and outwardly expressive, to always be building community through the things that they did. You know, like part of the paradox we were facing is that our culture uses, you know, the creative processes of our daily lives pretty much to make money, and then we're conscripted into that. And we're like, how can we use these projects as catalysts for building community? How can design serve the building of community? So I think it's really the essence of the work. It needs to be a vital part of the focus of everything. But as kind of a launching point to talk more about that, the way that we really made a big impact and pulled people together was we legalized the intersection project. You know, we painted all over the street and we built all these features on all the corners, and we got in trouble. And then the city council saw what we'd done and that we were addressing all of these goals for livability and sustainability. And the city council just legalized it within 3 months so that everybody could do it. And it's because we got past transportation and we got to make a presentation and we got to articulate our case, you know, which was that there was a connection between the absence of place and the fact that people don't talk to each other, or the fact that there's all this violence playing out and there's no basis for, you know, social connectivity. So, you know, they said yes to that, but it was partially because we were absolutely entertaining the city. We decided that we couldn't just leave the issue about this radical thing we were trying to do in the intersection, because the city would maybe actually figure out that we were doing something tremendously subversive. So we decided, all right, let's take this to another level and distract the city council while they're thinking about what we're doing. We took an old truck, because all these people in the neighborhood were connected. You know, we knew that we had this beaten up old truck sitting here that didn't run. We also knew that Brian, on the southwest corner, that let the little free library go in, southeast corner rather, he could fix the truck. And all these people had rugs and pillows and cups and forks, and people were growing bamboo in their yard. And so we built this insanely beautiful mobile gathering place. And it was like the tea house, except we call it the tea horse. We took the kitchen of our little potluck tea house and we put it onto the back of the truck. Then we built these gigantic bamboo canopies with like a 44-foot wingspan. And this thing would, like, you know, all of its pieces would collapse and go on top of the roof, and it would go around the city. It was all made of recycled and natural materials, all community powered. And wherever it would go, people would be waiting with beautiful desserts and drinks to share. So, I mean, for some people, it was like, what are you doing? Like, why is that important? You know, we're just not onto the idea that addressing social isolation is important. Or bringing people together, finally, is a great basis for actually doing something. So this thing went around the city, and it had 27 events bringing people together in all these neighborhoods. And then we linked them all together with people holding hands around the city. It was called Hands Around Portland. And we spanned 2 bridges and went through 15 neighborhoods. It was on World Peace Day. And for an hour, the route was people were sort of assembling on the route. And the community radio station was broadcasting the event live. So the radio hosts were like calling people to come out and join the circle. And then bicycle messengers that are normally running around downtown delivering things were on the route with cell phones. And then they were having people speak into the phone and connected to the community radio station saying, come on out. Like the mayor was like, come on out and join us on the circle. And the Portland Trailblazers were out there like, you know, join us, come on, hold our hands. So all these people came out and like, boom, stop traffic. The commissioner in charge of transportation had everybody stand in the streets to stop the cars. And he was on the radio in that moment saying, this is the most important thing that we can be doing, is reclaiming the commons. So it's really awesome. So but that was just like, you know, let's start by claiming our place and standing together and, you know, making the commitment. Like, this is our home. So, yeah, and that kind of impulse is really what weaves through all the stuff we're doing now, whether it's urban agriculture or an energy initiative or some water catchment, gray water projects. We've got this ethic of bringing people together around learning.
Yeah, but virtual How can we bring this back to the question of what we can do here? Like, you guys mentioned there was some money with the city, and how we're going to hear more about that and organize.
Well, I think money is great, and I hope that you have as much as you need. But we found, I just want to caution you, we found
Right.
we don't really tend to end up designing our solutions to rely on money.
Right.
It's like there's lots of forms of capital,
I
and
hear you.
people, the things we have are all of our ideas and talents. Like all of that we're used to activating only when there's money and only on behalf of what somebody else wants to do. Frankly, it's that kind of behavior that is actually destroying the world.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'll leave the home zone and go work in the work zone for someone at a job and do what I don't want to do. So instead, we're saying, is it possible to work right with the people where you live, somehow come together around a common cause and get so excited you don't even talk about money because people are like, well, I'll throw down my professional services. Well, I've got all of this like perforated pipe in my backyard which I can bring. I've got this backhoe, or I've got this fleet of shovels. So start off by just getting people excited around an idea that they all can benefit from and they identify with, and see what comes out of the community that's there. I forget, but
Yeah, that's,
I want to invite you, if you want to come to Portland for this national training we do every year at the same time of the year. We do this thing called the Village Building Convergence, and it happens for 10 days. And there's lots of different entry points, but you can come and see like 40 projects happening simultaneously all over the city, 40 different communities. And at night there's all sorts of things happening where people are speaking and interacting, lots of embodied learning these days. But I'm not wanting to make that sound like a commercial break, but it's a way for people to be able to see how it's happening in a city that's been doing it for a long time, and then bring these principles back to your own community.
Mark, when is that?
May 29th to June 7th, and I think there's a bunch of these invites. Let's pass this way. But there's a bunch of invites, I think, maybe on a table.
That's one thing I'm thinking of. One of the things we can do is talk to your neighbor, right? And have a little fire, invite them over for a little potluck, and then just kind of ask what questions do you have, or what brought you here, or how can we be better neighbors? What's the health and happiness of this neighborhood mean, right?
Sharing
That
and giving.
nobody asks that, right? It's absolutely insane that we don't ask that.
One thing that'll help is to not take no for an answer. to decide that you're gonna do it, and then try to help people to collaborate with you.
I love the statement that you made when you look around and you realize everyone is on your side. I thought that was really great, and I feel that I know that, and within my immediate community I know that. What I struggle with is transforming people from being wood in the fire to being the match that starts the fire. So when I hear a statement like, who wants to be involved, what I'm more curious in hearing is, who wants to be the match? I know that my own capacity, I am a match to too many things already. So I'm interested
I'm matched out.
in being a match factory.
Yeah, totally.
Do you have any advice?
Well, I think that the first I think that you're already doing a lot by being the match. You're modeling how to initiate, and if you are giving yourself permission to initiate, like especially if you're like bringing people together around food and beauty and fun, and that's woven into all that you're doing, people really open up to the model that you're providing. If you're an awesome listener, and you're really a facilitative leader, like more of an underseer than an overseer, then your modeling will tend to inspire other people to be matches, I would say. And I'm talking about something that we talk about and we aspire to, and I'm not perfect in being, but it's what I am trying to consciously, do myself.
My name is Becky Jorgensen, and I just want you all to know that we're starting a sustainable community village here in San Luis as soon as we find our land. We're called Hope's Village of SLO, and that's our little cabin out there. It has a light in it if you want to see it. gonna build 30 more of these for not only homeless people, but also for young professionals. Students at Cal Poly, as soon as we get this one up and going, we're gonna have them all over the county. And we're gonna be a model so that other people can do them. So we're not looking to buy land, we're looking for a long-term lease on land, or a donation would be nice. That's what we're doing, and Mark here was our inspiration.
Well, I love the fact that you just put it in terms of a big vision, and I would say to you that that's really key to inspiring people to be matches, is to articulate something that people can see that they fit into. There's a place for them, like a big picture. We're not just going to do this one thing, we're doing the whole thing. And people they're just like starving for that kind of passion and vision. And, just make sure when you're doing that you really are seriously about we. And not being self-referential too much, like I think this, I say that, I say this, I see this. But making sure that everybody's voice, as much as you can, is being heard. It's the balancing act that the leader plays, or the catalyst plays. Yeah. But this, go ahead.
I was going to say, in respect of time, do you want any wrap-up comments that you want to
Sure.
throw out?
Well,
We'll stay around the fire as long as you want, but
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, to wrap it up, well, we met earlier today, and I've been working on so-called homeless village initiatives for a while, and we talked about this paradox this morning. What we're actually sort of slipping in, it almost seems like through the back door, is that, well, like the folks at Dignity Village in Portland said, we might seem to be homeless, but we have a village, and nobody else can say that. When they started off making this proposal to the city council, it just seemed like such a stretch for the city council. They were like, okay, so you're homeless people and you're telling us that you're going to have a totally walkable, talkable community with the highest rate of political participation and the lowest embodied energy and the smallest carbon footprint. Like, how in the world can you say that? And they had just put out this call. What community will show up to practice voluntary simplicity? Will any neighborhood try to confront climate change? Nobody did, not even in Portland. But Dignity Village said, we will be the ones who will show the way. So it's so paradoxical, but there's some amazing truths in it. Like, people who are housed are also desperately lonely, while at the same time people in the streets, and I don't want to romanticize them, actually have much more practice in socialization. And when they have a chance to talk and articulate a vision, it is amazingly powerful and shared. And they can access their feelings much more strongly, generally speaking. So the village that we've ended up creating is every bit that walkable, talkable, least embodied energy, highest rate of political participation model that's replicated itself. And we built it out of garbage, but it's changed laws. It's inspired villages to happen in many other places in the country that are all improvements on the original one. It also decided who would be mayor in 2004. Because the guy who said, I have $1.5 million and I will be mayor, and I oppose Dignity Village because it's terrible, and they should all just go back to living under doorways, even though there are women alone at night. Mm-hmm. And on the other hand, this guy stood up who said, I'm not afraid of your $1.5 million. In fact, I'm dedicated to community. And nobody, I've talked to 100 single women with children, and nobody, the average that they can give me is $25. So nobody in this entire city gives me more than $25. So here's this guy, standing up with integrity. And he goes out to start building housing with homeless people at the village. And the city's paying attention, who is this guy? So Tom Potter, with only $70,000, but all of it $25 or less contributions, crushes Jim Francesconi in the primary, who spent $1.5 million. But he was this corrupt, puss bag. And the other guy was this beloved community leader. And, he stood for something. So I guess I'll just stop my talking by saying that you have no idea what you will set into motion. You have no idea. When you build a little free library, a roomie station, or a homeless village, or whatever it is, how you will change consciousness and change behavior. This is the stuff, like people are thinking, oh my God, the world's, what's wrong with us? The world is sucking. Like, oh my God, we're so in danger. Like, what's happening is that we're not doing these things. Like, that's why things are dystopic, because we're not engaged and we're not creating our own destiny. And anytime you do one of these points of, you might call them points of light, it helps the ecology start to respond. It's really a very ecological strategy, like intervene with a creative thing which asserts essential human patterns and behaviors, and suddenly it's more powerful than everything else around it, which comes out of a catalog made or was built by a developer and doesn't have a story to tell. And suddenly this little thing, this little dispenser of poetry suddenly is like stronger than everything else around it, because it says people, values, children, patience, all these things it embodies. So I'm just that. It just makes me so excited without limit. That because I know that everything we do affects more than we can ever know. So I have every reason to get off the couch, to get out of bed every day. An irrepressible excitement. So anyway, thank you very much for all of us coming together.
Maybe we should talk about the lyrics. Like,
yeah.
it's kind of like the water cycle, imagining where the rain is going, and we get confused, or I've gotten confused every time we've sung this song so far. It's very new, so it's like if you say the wrong word in the place, like don't worry about it. Just say whatever word you want, basically.
You want to do call and response first, maybe?
Sure.
All right. We'll do a little call and response first. Raindrops are falling, my spirit's rising.
Raindrops are falling, my spirit's rising.
The water washes my griefs clean.
The water washes my griefs clean.
It takes it down to the trees.
It takes it down to the trees.
Which brings new life to you and me.
Which brings new life to you and me.
The raindrops are falling, my spirit's rising. Water washes my grief clean. It takes it down to the sea. It brings new life to you and me. I said the raindrops are falling, my spirit's rising. Water washes my grief clean. Takes it down to the sea. It brings life to you and me. I said the raindrops are falling, my spirit's rising. Water washes my grief clean. Takes it down to the stream. It brings new life to you and me. I said the raindrops are falling, my spirit's rising. Water washes my grief clean. Takes it down to the stream. It brings new life to you and me. I said the raindrops are falling, my spirit's rising. Water washes my grief clean. Takes it down to the breeze. To you and me. I said the raindrops are falling, my spirit's rising. Water washes my grief clean. Takes it down to the streets. It brings new life to you and me. I said the raindrops are falling, my spirit's rising. Water washes my grief clean. Takes it down to the stream, which brings new life to you and me. I said the rains are falling, my spirit's rising. Water washes my grief clean. It takes it down to the stream, to you and me. adventurous on that.